So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Troy Meink, Director of GEOINT at NRO. In this capacity, Troy is responsible for the execution of national geospatial intelligence satellite systems and acquisitions within NRO with a budget of $15 billion. Additionally, he is charged with sustaining mission partner relationships between federal agencies and representing NRO programs to Congress, the DNI, DoD, OMB, and the community management staff. Troy will discuss commercial imagery, the way forward. Please join me in welcoming him, and remember there'll be no cards passed around, and he'll have time for a couple of questions at the end of his remarks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to talk here today. Actually, my first time at GEOINT. Been looking forward to it for a while. It's an interesting venue. Give a talk in, pretty wide open for us. So as Susan mentioned, I'm responsible for essentially procuring, maintaining, and supporting operations for our overhead national systems, supporting both the national and military intelligence communities. Essentially, my job is to make sure that the systems we build kind of maintain the capability, maintain the advantages that the U.S. has enjoyed for decades because of its space systems. Somewhat new, and one of the reasons I'm here today, and one of the things I'm going to focus on mostly, is we've also picked up the role of acquiring commercial imagery. Traditionally, we've just supported the national systems. This is a little bit of a new role for us, procuring the commercial systems, working with previously DG with the Enhanced View contract, and then, as I'll be talking about today, expanding the number of contractors that we're working with and the different products we are trying to get from the commercial market. We're actually very excited about it. It's a little bit new for us. It's a very dynamic environment, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing and the progress we're making. But before I do that, I'm going to talk just briefly about what the NRO is. Probably everybody here has a general idea of what the NRO does, so I'll be brief, and I'll try to keep some time at the end for questions. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we face in maintaining the capabilities we have delivered, and really specifically how we plan to leverage the commercial market to help us do that. Next slide. All right, so again, this is actually one of the reasons why I really enjoy working at the NRO, is the very diverse set of missions and users that we support. I spend probably about 50% of my time working with the DoD community, the military intelligence community, and I spend about 50% of my time working with the national intelligence community, which includes all the IC and domestic agencies across the board, supporting all sorts of different missions. Strategic missions, arms control, those sorts of things, all the way down to tactical missions supporting, again, both the DoD and the IC side of the house. Those are more of the traditional missions. I think the missions that a lot of people aren't fully aware that we work with is with the wide breadth of domestic agencies. We do a lot of support for disaster relief, whether that's hurricanes or tracking plumes from volcanoes, those sorts of things. We do a lot of missions along that line. Environmental monitoring. If you go by NRO's booth, there's hardware that was built, film canisters that was built in the 60s. The NRO has been monitoring and taking pictures of the world for quite some time. As you can imagine, that kind of information that we've done and know and others have done is important to environmental monitoring. A lot of this is also used with commercial imagery, which we're now taking a larger role and is used for this mission. And then law enforcement. Actually, this is probably a growth industry supporting everything from drug trafficking along the borders to really law enforcement supporting the various domestic agencies worldwide. So people always ask me, what is the things that challenge me most or keep me awake at night the most? And that's maintaining kind of the capabilities that the U.S. has enjoyed for decades in a very rapidly evolving environment. D&I Coates, Director of National Intelligence, in his worldwide threat assessment, and this is something we pay a lot of attention to, talked about how we're increasingly competitive environment, and a lot of the things that we've relied on in the past aren't necessarily there unless we're very aggressive in how we innovate and how we take advantage of every opportunity we have commercially and otherwise to maintain the advantages we've traditionally had. The demand signal is growing. That's one of the reasons why we're going to be stepping up our procurement of commercial imagery. Is the demand signal is growing significantly, and we expect to leverage that commercial market to help fill that demand signal. And the demand signal is evolving very rapidly. Again, as D&I Coates mentioned, the technology proliferation globally, both in space and on the ground, is changing that environment dramatically, and that's something we spend a lot of time trying to figure out is how do we evolve fast enough to stay ahead of the changing environment, again, to make sure that we can continue the capability delivery that we've done. And then you can never have a space discussion at all unless you talk about a little bit about the contested space environment. I'm not going to talk about that much here, but that is, again, another driver forcing us to be more innovative than we traditionally, or at least the pace of innovation more fast than we've necessarily been in the past. With that, what are we going to do? What are some of the levers we're going to turn to maintain and address all these challenges? As I mentioned, the commercial market. Next slide. So there's a lot going on in the commercial world. There's not just the commercial imagery itself that's evolving very rapidly, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second here. But the commercial technology. We talk a lot about how rocket scientists, really super advanced space systems. To be quite honest, most of our space systems are actually not the leading edge technology. Historically, the way we built systems, because of the environment that we have to operate in space, we've actually not kept up in many cases with the commercial environment. We're trying to do that. Again, not just in the commercial imagery side of the house, but in how we build, how we insert technology in our systems. We're being much more aggressive in how we do that to dramatically increase what I call the rate of change in our systems by leveraging the commercial market, both hardware-wise, really leveraging the billions and billions of dollars that are spent in the mobile digital market, 5G and those sorts of things, as well as the compute that is just critical for all my son's Xbox and other video machines. And then as well as the algorithms, and there was just a talk on software. Software is a big deal across the board. But for us, it's the algorithms, the AI stuff that helps you find cat videos on the internet. That's the sort of thing that we're really trying to leverage. We haven't traditionally done so. We're still really trying to push that into our systems again to innovate faster and maintain the capabilities that we need to deliver. Launch, again, in discussion on space, is a rapidly evolving launch market. GAO would say we spent $350 million a launch on average years ago. When you have $350 million for a launch, that's a pretty high cost of entry. It really constricts what you can do with your space systems and how fast you can evolve them. That's changing rapidly. Launch systems have come down significantly. We're trying to take advantage of that. And the commercial market is trying to take advantage of that too. As you know, historically, there's been a lot of push to try to bring on more commercial space systems, fits and starts. The freedom that the lower cost launch providers, both at the large scale and the small scale, are offering, as well as the heritage launch providers, how much they're driving the cost down, is really opening up architectures both on the government side to increase what we can do and give us more flexibility, but also on the commercial side. I think one of the reasons, and there are some of them here that would hopefully agree with me, one of the reasons why you're seeing a rapid increase in a lot of the commercial vendor offerings, both in imaging as well as in comm and other areas, is really driven by a lot of the things on this chart, and particularly the launch environment and our ability to launch stuff cheaper. So our job going forward is how do we take advantage of both what I would argue the left side of the chart and the right side of the chart. Inserting technology into our systems, but also leveraging that rapidly evolving commercial market. And it is rapidly evolving, and I have a couple of examples here in the next slide. But what we're really trying to do is be flexible. All the commercial vendors are not in the same place. All of the commercial vendors don't have the same business plan. And we, the government, have to be flexible in how we work with and try to procure capabilities from these commercial vendors. The government, as many of you know, can have a heavy hand sometimes. And we may not necessarily like the business case they have and try to change it, or like the way they're proceeding and try to change it. We're really trying not to do that. We want to leverage the commercial providers, leverage what they're trying to do, leverage that innovation, and move ahead. And I think we're doing that, and I think we've made some pretty good progress. Next slide. Sorry, I keep forgetting I have control of the clicker here. Before I jump into some of the commercial stuff we're actually procuring, I again would just want to capture, and I think the actual person responsible for this, Jay Bellis, is here. NGA as the foundational, or the director of NGA as the GEOINT functional manager, builds requirements for us. They basically gather them up from across the community. And they've just completed a fairly in-depth effort to do that. And the commercial class requirements have gone up dramatically. And that's really what's driving us as a procurement agency to go out and be much more aggressive about engaging with these commercial providers. I won't talk about exactly how much it's increased, but it has increased significantly over what we've traditionally procured from the commercial providers, so we're working hard to try to address that. And obviously, as a good steward of government taxpayer dollars, my goal is to try to get the best bang for the buck across the board and utilize everything out there that we potentially can, and I think we've made good progress. And we kind of broke that into two phases, and I'll talk about that next. All right, so the first thing when we went and transferred Enhanced View from NGA over, which is the historic DigiGlobe contract, over to the NRO, the thing that NGA stomped their foot on, and the entire user community stomped their foot on, was no disruption in service. They cannot afford a disruption in service. So the first thing we did was made sure that the historic capability that we received from DigiGlobe was well in hand, and we moved that over and awarded that contract in 2018, and that actually went very seamlessly. Working with NGA, working with Congress to do that, working with Maxar, DigiGlobe, we were able to move that contract over with no disruption in service, and we're very, very happy with that. But since then, we, again, based on the increasing requirements we're getting from NGA, and again, they're the ones responsible. If there's any government users here who aren't getting what they want, they're running around here, so you can go talk to them about it. But we really needed to look at increasing the number of vendors and getting access to more vendors to meet those capabilities. So now we, in January, I think it was, January this year, put out RFIs. Requests for information. We actually put those out to get as wide as dissemination, as wide as participation as we possibly could. Matter of fact, we actually put out the RFI from the National Reconnaissance Office on Facebook and Twitter. I was not aware the NRO even had a Facebook account and a Twitter account, but we do, and we put them out, and we got a lot of response from across the industry. Now, the first phase of this discussion with the broader industry set was really focused on, vendors that already had capability of some sort. I'll talk in a minute. We're also looking at vendors who don't have capability yet, potentially could deliver capability. But this first step was to go after vendors that had existing capability. And I'll just be happy to say, as of last Friday, so the very, very end of May, we've awarded 2 additional contracts with commercial vendors, Black Sky and Planet. We're pretty happy about that, actually very excited about that. And this is this first step, we call them study contracts, but these are major efforts to start working with the commercial vendors that traditionally we have not done so, to figure out what they can do, figure out how they can deliver product, and how we can best meet the requirements that are given to us by the larger community. And this is just the first step. We figure within the next 6 to 12 months, if all goes well with these initial contracts, we'll be awarding procurement contracts with these, again, to meet requirements that have been passed over to us from the larger user community. But that's not the end of it. I'd say this is with, again, the first was to try to make sure that we're focusing on maintaining capability that we've always had, start building on that capability with vendors who already have offerings in existence, although I think they all expect to expand that offering. But the next step is going to be to look at other contractors and other phenomenologies, radar and others, that are just in the incubation period in the commercial world. We're looking at working with them to figure out how we can, again, be flexible enough to work with them and procure capability without upsetting what they're trying to do in the commercial world. So we're really excited about that and made pretty good progress. It's a very, very dynamic environment, as probably everybody here is aware. An example of that is we put out the RFI in January of this year. We gave a month or so for contractors to respond. We got proposals, information in from the contractors. And when we were getting ready to award the contractors, we had already gotten contractors who had come back and changed what they were planning to do. And we had some contractors that were no longer in the business and were no longer participating. So this is a very, very dynamic environment. We're trying to be flexible and take advantage of it, knowing that it's not a traditional big defense contractors we're working with, and I think we're gonna make good progress. But in the end, it's going to give us more capability for the dollar than we would have otherwise, which is why we're very excited about it. That's all I have. Again, I think one of the things I would just say is that whether we're talking about what we're doing on the national side or the commercial side, trying to increase our innovation, increase the speed of innovation has really been my focus, the NRO's focus. It sometimes can be very difficult with processes that we have across the government. But I would just say, given the focus that we've seen from our oversight and from Congress, we've made more progress. The support that we've been given more progress and moving out on some of these commercial vendors and some of the new national efforts that we have, making good progress, again, to try to deliver capability more rapidly than we have in the past. And I just really want to thank everybody who's participated in that. And there's a lot of people in this room who have helped us. So with that, I will turn it over to questions, Susan. I think I left quite a little bit of time.
So I have a couple of questions here. You mentioned working more with law enforcement, that was a new initiative that NRO is pursuing. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Probably a little bit, but not a lot. But we the drug trafficking and other law enforcement activities, right? We support those activities, and I think that's probably a growing industry for us. That's about all I can say.
Okay. You mentioned posting an RFI on Twitter and Facebook, maybe using some less conventional routes for contracting. Any other creative ways you all are looking to work with small businesses other than just the prime and sub relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, and traditionally we go out to when we go out to vendors, even in the commercial world, it's generally vendors who already have something that we can procure at this point in time. We don't usually go out and start exploratory conversations with a company who's thinking about developing a capability or thinking about raising financing to develop a capability. So we're looking at doing that. A lot of these are very different contracting mechanisms and approaches than we've historically done. But I think the key there is flexibility. Pete Meunk, sitting right here, the guy who runs this for me, working closely with our budgeting contracts people to come up with ways that offer the flexibility for us to take advantage of those. And if there are any recommendations, any ideas, I'm sure I'll hear some of those. But we are welcome and open to pretty much anything.
Great. I have a couple more questions here. How does your role overlap with NGA responsibilities?
So essentially, it's probably very oversimplistic, but we are kind of the procurement arm of NGA when it comes to satellites and satellites procurement. Now, it's NGA and their functional manager role where they represent the entire community from a requirements perspective. But essentially what we do is we acquire capability, operate capability, maintain that capability to support the entire user, national, and military defense community. We do processing, and then that's turned over to the analytic community, and they take full advantage of that.
Great. Will the federal civil agencies have access to the black sky and planet imagery from the study?
I actually don't know how far we're going to distribute that. During the initial study, I think there will be some access to that data. And there are actually separate additional contracts that are already in place with, I know Planet for sure, I'm sure, as well as Black Sky. But this initial study phase is to really work with the vendors as well as with some of the users to really try to understand the capability, what it can be used for, and then turn that back around and enter into basically contracting structures with the contractors. And licensing is always a very big deal, right? We understand that's always a big challenge with the commercial providers is who's licensed and how we're licensed to use it, both within the U.S. or potentially with our Five Eye partners. So obviously that's this study phase. That's a big part of that, is trying to refine and sort through how we would license the data and how we could use the data. So I'm not sure exactly who's going to get access to it in this first study phase, but there will be more than just the NRO and NGA.
Okay, will there be a new RFP for the incubation contracts? If so, when?
We're still sorting through that right now, how we're going to be doing that. I think there will be, and I can't speak, Pete, the idea of the time frame on that, but it's probably in the next 6 to 12 months for sure. Again, and it's probably not going to just be one, right? There will probably be multiple RFIs for different type of capability that we see emerging, and that's a big part of what we're doing, is trying to understand and watch the environment, which is why we like to come to these kind of venues now, is to better understand what capability is emerging and then structure RFIs and other activities to try to take advantage of that.
And what is your biggest challenge from a policy perspective? I know depending on who we ask, we'll get a variety of different answers, but from your perspective, what would you say that is?
It depends on the day. Depends on what problem I run up against that particular day. To be honest, I haven't seen any of the policies that have really stood in our way from getting it done. I mean, there are some things you have to work on. It causes a little bit more effort. But how we do classification, how we move data around, how we license data, all those sorts of things are important thing and are touched on by policy. But I don't think there's anything in policy that I'm saying that I believe needs to be changed for allow us to do what we're going to do. It actually gives quite a bit of flexibility, and we're taking full advantage of that flexibility. And to be honest, when we talk about acquisition regulations, we talk about policy, usually those things give you the flexibility. You just have to be willing to exercise it.
So you mentioned Five Eyes earlier. Does NRO plan to leverage the international commercial network of data providers to complement the U.S. providers?
Right now in our procurement, it's primarily U.S. companies, right?
Okay.
That's what we're restricted to right now, matter of fact, under policy. But that's what we're working with right now. That doesn't mean we're not going to work with Five Eyes, and NGA does a lot of the data sharing with our Five Eye and other partners. But with respect to procurement, it's primarily U.S. companies. Or it is all U.S. companies, not just primarily.
And how eager are you all to embrace disruptive technologies these days?
Very much. Very much. I would argue that back to innovation, the pace of innovation, leveraging the disruptive technologies is just critical. But there is not a one-size-fits-all kind of magic bullet approach to solving these. Mission matters. How you structure your acquisitions and how you maintain mission and handle the risk associated with disruptive technologies, right? And then, physics has a vote, the budgeteers have a vote. How you integrate all those together is the key thing. But a lot of what we spent doing is trying to structure how we go about business so that we can leverage disruptive technologies, but not risk our ability to deliver capabilities. And it seems like they'd be counter, but that's not the case. You can develop strategies that allow you to take a lot of risk in some areas, but still guarantee that you can deliver capability. And that's really the crux of the shift in how we do acquisition.
Of the enabling technologies that you highlighted on your slides earlier, which would you say give the greatest lift?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Which give the greatest lift or have the highest emphasis?
Well, I would argue that I'm going to answer that in two pieces,
Okay.
right? I think the change in the launch environment, going from $350 million a launch to under 100 million and down under 10 for some of the smaller rockets, like Rocket Labs is offering, and others as well potentially. That is kind of a 1 or a 0. That opens a door to architectures that was not possible before. They just were not affordable. The cost of entry was too high. Didn't allow you the flexibility to do a lot of stuff. So that's kind of a necessary, but not necessarily are sufficient. On the other side of the house, a lot of the digital, a lot of the processing, a lot of the new algorithms that there's discussion on software here, those all go hand in hand. What's enabled a lot of the AI, a lot of the machine learning is really the compute, right? And a lot of the digital stuff that went along with it. It's not a one or it's not one or the other. You really have to have those integrated together, whether you're in space or on the ground, to take full advantage of them. And that's why you've seen in the commercial market develop so fast over the last 10 years. The compute power tied with, a lot of the software development has enabled things that just really were not possible 10 years ago. I mean, convolutional neural nets, when I was first in college, back in the late 80s, convolutional neural nets were going to be the answer to everything. Well, it took us about 30 years to develop the compute capable of using them in an effective way. So it's really, you can't separate them. It's the integration of all those things that are critical.
Okay. With environmental monitoring, do you run into any privacy issues?
Yeah, privacy is probably less of an issue than this classification, but you have to pay attention to both privacy and classification of that data. But it's workable, particularly in crisis situations. You can always work through those issues, and NGA is great at doing so, to use the data that's necessary to get the job done.
Who is responsible for the tasking, processing, and dissemination for your commercial capabilities?
NGA is responsible for tasking for all of our systems. The NRO has always done processing and always does some level of processing across the board. It's not a solid line. It's gray area. There's a lot of processing we do at the NRO, and NGA also, and the rest of the community, not just NGA, but the entire rest of the community does processing on our data as well, which is good. I mean, that's part of how you handle data, and data as a strategic asset is putting it in a form that everybody can do processing and utilize that data regardless of where you are. But primarily, we do the collection, some upfront processing, and then we turn it over to the analytic community to do a lot of additional processing.
Great. Well, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.